All right, if you play Dynasty Fantasy Football, odds are you have at one point or another tried to rebuild a team, or you are currently trying to rebuild a team. And today we're going to talk about how you should go about doing that. There are a lot of different strategies that you can have when you're rebuilding a Dynasty team. There are a lot of different important things to make sure you do. We're going to touch on each of them today in this video. We hope it helps you out. Make sure you subscribe to the channel. We love that you guys are joining our community. We love making videos for you guys. So make sure you hit subscribe, especially if you find out that you have been helped by this video today. Make sure you hit like on the video. Let's get into how to rebuild the Dynasty team. So usually when you are post-startup draft, as we will all find ourselves here fairly soon after startup season, you are either a clear contender or a clear rebuild. And that's not always, I only have old guys, I only have young guys. Sometimes that's a combination of the two, but it's always good to be clear what direction you're taking your Dynasty team in, because if you're just hanging out in the middle, I mean, there's not really a lot you're going to accomplish there. So the other boat that you could be in is that you thought you had a contending team, and actually you don't. You missed on a lot of players that you thought would bring value to your roster from a production standpoint, and now you've got to rebuild your team and start over. So we're going to give you all of the different tips today to try to do that in the most effective and time-sensitive manner, because we'll tell you right off the bat, a 4-year rebuild is not a good idea in Dynasty. I mean, just based on league lives alone, that's going to be too long. So let's just go through the rules of rebuilding a Dynasty team, and I'll start with the first one, and this should be the most obvious one. If you have decreasing assets on your team, which means if the player or pick, and it's never going to be a pick, so always a player you have on your team is going to be worth less in 5 or 6 months or in a year than it's worth now, then you need to be getting that player off your roster. So a really good example of this on a rebuilding team, and again, this is probably the most obvious point, is older running backs. So guys like Derrick Henry, Dalvin Cook, who are just getting older, while they may be productive, you should be selling these guys to a contending team while they still hold value. You don't want to be actively losing value while you're rebuilding a team. So
yeah, and I think this really is going to hold true, especially for those that are on their second contracts. I mean, if you have a 25, 26-year-old running back who's still on his rookie deal, I wouldn't be necessarily in a hurry to get that guy off your roster, because chances are, I mean, if they're a high-producing running back on the rookie deal, the guy I'm thinking about right now is Josh Jacobs. As a rebuild, I wouldn't be in a hurry to get him off my roster.
Yeah,
because he has a good 3 to 4 years of relevant, contender life left, which has a lot of value. But yeah, like those guys like Austin Eckler, like you said, Derrick Henry, those are the guys for sure that you want to be looking at. Nick Chubb is also on that list for me. Dalvin Cook, Aaron Jones, they all have significant value for contending teams, and you can get a nice price for them.
And again, you just look at it. If they're going to decrease in value, this could even be a receiver. This could even be an older receiver. I mean, Devontae Adams is not increasing in value. So if you're a 1 to 2 year rebuild, you're probably going to be looking at, shipping him off. Now, here's where you have to find a balance, because this is where, while this is the most obvious step and people think this is the easiest step, people go way overboard with this, because they think that all of their players on their team on a rebuild have to be like under 22 or under 23 years old. Under 22 would be a stretch. But, I mean, you do see, people are going only rookies, only second-year players and rookies. I mean, that is not the way to approach it. You're going to lose out on not only a lot of value if you do that, but you got to understand that some of these 25-year-old, as you said, Josh Jacobs is a perfect example. I think Chris Godwin is another good example at wide receiver. He's 26 years old. You could be like, oh, Chris Godwin, he's old. I want to get him off my roster. When, in fact, in 2 years, Chris Godwin's still going to be very productive. And you shouldn't be trying to rebuild more than 2 years out in the future. So by that logic, him being a receiver, especially and holding his value well, not to mention a hyper-productive receiver that's typically over or undervalued in Dynasty, you really shouldn't be shipping off a guy like that. So obviously, there's not a super fine line, but people do tend to go overboard with this. Make sure you have a good mix still of guys that are proven. You're not going all in on risky players, and that when I say that, I mean guys that are coming in the NFL that you're not 100% sure are going to be elite proven fantasy assets.
Yeah, and I think with our next step here, going into who are the players that you should be investing in after you sell off those decreasing assets, I think the guys that we're gonna tell you to kind of take a risk on, but it's going to be worth it, are those guys that have suffered a season-ending injury the previous year. I mean, we're talking this past year, some of the best values you were getting in startups were Saquon Barkley, and Chris Godwin, and the likes. And I think this year you're going to see the same thing happen with guys like Javonte Williams, who is a great value where he's going at right now in the late 5th round, I believe. And then Chris Godwin at the wide receiver position, which we just mentioned earlier.
Trey Lance
coming off an injury. Trey Lance will be a really, really nice buy. I mean, he's going Trey Lance, his ADP has actually dropped, not as much as I thought it would, only a half round. But he still has that security and that draft capital there in San Francisco. Jonathan Taylor, I mean, I don't think we've preached this enough this season. His year has been more than disappointing. I mean, it's been league losing. And if that is going to be the reason why you're low on him going into next season, think again. I'm buying the heck out of Jonathan Taylor.
Yeah, absolutely. I had a team this year where I, went in, I thought I was going to be competing, and I completely crapped the bed. And so my strategy, because I had shipped away my 23 first, because I had no draft capital left to work with, and the guy that had mine would not sell it back to me. I couldn't get my hands on any. So my next best option was to buy in injured players. I got Trey Lance at a really steep discount, actually. His value has gone back up since the middle of the season, but if you're getting him like closer to where he got injured, you got him at a very, very nice discount. Javonte Williams. And again, I know Javonte had a really nasty injury, so this is not to say that we are 100% confident that Javonte is going to come back and start tearing it up production-wise. What this is, though, is a guy that we are fairly confident is going to go back up in value at some point. Meaning, and the same thing with Trey Lance, a guy who I'm not 100% confident in, but I am confident that once he steps on the field or once there's these crazy videos of him
his ADP
in
will
OTAs or something like that, you'll be able to sell him for twice as much as you paid for him. I mean, it's not about betting on the injured players, it's about betting on their value. And you can guarantee, you see it with every single injured player in the NFL, after they take that massive value dip that these dynasty players want to put on these injured guys, after they take that dip, they are going to go back up. It is inevitable.
Yeah, and we would love to see you guys drop some comments here in the video, just telling us what guys you think are going to be buys, especially for rebuilds this offseason, that are the best values, guys that have been injured. I mean, I think probably the biggest buy this offseason at the quarterback position is already Kyler Murray, hands down.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, he's a perfect example.
He went from just untouchable to... like he's falling in some drafts to the middle of the 2nd round.
I've gotten him there.
It's crazy.
Recently. I mean,
and there's just, I'm sorry, there's no excuse for that.
And with Kyler,
there just isn't.
He's a guy I'm holding because he's on a huge contract.
Yes.
He's different than Trey Lance. This is a guy we know can produce in fantasy. This is a guy that we know has elite rushing upside, and he's on a big contract with the Arizona Cardinals. Not only is he going to come back and produce, but he's going to come back and produce for a long time. What did I say? What was funny?
Cardinals.
Yeah, whatever. All right, and the next rule that we have for a rebuilding team is going to be to load up on wide receivers and quarterbacks. And again, this kind of goes with what we talked about, in the first part of the video, but it's pretty important that you get these wide receivers, especially rookie wide receivers, because of the way that they maintain their value, or most of the time increase their value. Again, you're going to be wanting to get assets that are going to increase their value over the next year, over the next 6 months, depending on how quickly you're planning on rebuilding. Wide receivers and quarterbacks are the two best position groups I would even argue tight end. Like if you have a proven tight end that you can somehow get at a discount, any tight end over 25, even.
Yeah. And I would say don't even invest in a tight end expecting them to potentially have like an elite rise in ADP and an elite ceiling for their career, but they do rise in ADP significantly, even when they don't produce at a super high level, and that's when you can get value out of them by shipping them off after you buy them while they're low. I mean, we saw this with Jelani Woods was a guy, Chigo Okonkwo, who you were getting off waivers in most leagues, and their ADP has skyrocketed. And in my opinion, those are the guys that I'd be selling as a rebuild now if you invested in them before. Same thing's going to hold true for these rookie tight ends this season. Again, for you rebuilders, if you can get them in the 3rd, 4th rounds of rookie drafts and even off waivers and as throw-ins and trades, just sit on them. Hold on to them until they score a touchdown and then see how their ADP is looking. I mean, Charlie Kolar hasn't even stepped on the field this year and his ADP has risen. He's the third tight end behind Isaiah Likely and Mark Andrews in Baltimore. Like, a terrible situation, and his ADP has risen. It's crazy.
Yeah.
In terms of the wide receivers and QBs loading up on that, this is not something we're just pulling out of our butts. Like, this has proven true, and this has resulted in success, some major success for teams that we have been a part of, and teams that we've seen succeed in this way. I mean, one of the teams that I had this year I made it to the semifinals as a rebuilding team. I didn't expect to do anything, but I had Amon-Ra St. Brown, A.J. Brown, Michael Pittman, Devontae Smith, Chris Olave, Deebo Samuel. Like, those are all guys that I invested in the offseason for way cheaper than really anyone else that you can get, just good values. Same's going to hold for quarterback. I think Kenny Pickett is going to be a guy you rebuilding teams should be looking to buy him as soon as possible. I could see him taking a rise, maybe not as dramatic as Tua this season, but I could see something similar like that going into next year.
Yeah,
So.
and then our next one here is going to be to acquire as many draft picks as possible, and that's going to seem obvious to you, but the reason that this is important is when you're talking about shipping off your decreasing assets and investing in increasing assets, you are to some extent taking a gamble, taking a guess on if they're actually going to increase. While we typically have a pretty good idea, nobody knows what the future is going to hold for some of these guys. With picks, there is no doubt a 2023 first, if you buy it now, will be worth more after the draft. I mean, that is just how these picks work every single year. And every draft class is the new best draft class of all time. You're going to see it with 2024. We're warning you now. Everybody's going to be like, this is even better than 2023. And so, you know what? Something that I've tried to practice on my rebuilding teams, I've been trying to get 2024 picks because I know right now, number one, the market price has inflated so much on 23 picks. And I know come, August, come September, when people realize how good this next class is, those 24 picks, they're cheaper now. They're going to be worth so much more in even 6 months.
Yep.
So that's why it's important to get the draft picks, not because you want to have young players and because draft picks are good for rebuild, just because they're going to increase in value. And honestly, the next part to that is to sell some of them once the time comes.
Yeah, and just on top of what you were saying there earlier, I mean, 24 picks are real good bang for your buck right now.
Go get them.
If you're rebuilding, chances of you contending the following year after shipping off all of your assets to get picks, like, it's really low. So have a little bit of foresight and plan ahead. You don't have to sell everyone you have right now for 23 picks. Don't lose value when you're trying to get picks now. Look a year, look 2 years ahead. Don't look too far ahead. But
you'll thank us if you go get 24 picks now. You will thank us in 6 months.
Yeah, and the reason we're telling you to take all these draft picks is not because we want you to use all of those on yourself. We want you to sell those in draft.
Some of them. I mean,
not all of them.
It is good sometimes to invest in a JSN.
Yes.
A rookie wide receiver that has fallen, that's a good.
Absolutely.
But if you're going to collect 8 draft picks, the mistake people make is that they pick 8 players. And you're not going to hit on every rookie. Not every rookie that goes in the first round of Dynasty draft hits. In fact, it's a lot less great than what you would think it would be in terms of those guys hitting. So because of that, pick the guys you're confident in. Pick the better investments. QBs, wide receivers. Sometimes rookie running backs can be good investments.
Yeah,
too.
I mean, Bijan right now, we did a video, you can check it out, about us saying that we don't really like where Bijan is going right now in terms of his ADP. He's almost being drafted at his ceiling already. But
in startups.
In startups, yeah.
Not rookie.
But again, if you're a rebuild and you have an opportunity to get a cornerstone asset like Bijan, I mean, we don't have a problem with you doing that at all. Go for it.
Yeah,
Go
absolutely.
for it. He's a generational talent. We all think he's going to go in the first round of the NFL draft, and it'll be fun to see where he goes.
But again, have a balance of rookies and guys, first-year players like Bijan that you want to invest in, and then send off some of those picks for proven players. You are going to decrease the amount of risk on your team. You're going to decrease the amount of risk that you will never contend by shipping off your 104 and something else for a guy like A.J. Brown. I mean, that's just how it is. You definitely are going to want to have a good mix of proven, productive fantasy players and then incoming younger elite rookie prospects. That's just the best way to do it. It's been proven. You don't want to put all of your eggs in one basket. So what else we got here in terms
of
rebuilding?
On the topic of, trading off some of those draft picks to get some really good value and maybe some middle-aged wide receivers and QBs and things like that, we'd say be intentional about your throw-ins.
Yep.
Don't go and offer a really cheap low draft pick for Alec Pierce or something, like straight up. Don't do that. Get a guy that you're interested in, an asset that you're interested in, where you really like their potential and their ceiling and their situation. Get them in those throw-ins. That's going to be really important to just add to the chances of you hitting on those deals.
Yeah, absolutely. Rookies are really good throw-ins. Rookie running backs that don't have a ton of value, or rookie wide receivers that haven't hit yet, just if they are at throw-in level, you absolutely. Tyquan Thornton is an example of a rookie wide receiver that's probably worth almost nothing, and rightfully so. But he's a good throw-in on a trade for a rebuild because he's so young, and because he's on a team with very little to no. While there's not historically been a ton of wide receiver production, there's not a lot of competition.
Yeah, and back to the tight ends topic too. I mean, get those tight ends as throw-ins. Yep. Get those rookie tight ends.
Absolutely, and. Also with trading, I think if you're a rebuilding team, and this is just personal, some people might not agree with this, I found that the more I trade and the more I explore trades, the better I end up rebuilding. And I think this is because the more you trade, the more small value wins you can take. If you can get a small value win over somebody, you're like, okay, great. I got some value back from my Dynasty team. I think I won that trade on value by just a little bit. But if you do that 10 times, then you're like, okay, I won each of these trades by a small value amount. Now I'm looking at a pretty large value increase over the last 10 trades. Now, because it's obviously going to be harder to fleece somebody in Dynasty. If you're playing with smart league mates, odds are they're not just going to let you get away with a crazy value increase, a crazy value advantage there. The way to do it is if they're willing to give something up for a guy they like and you win by a small amount of value and you do that repeatedly over an offseason, you find yourself with a lot more value at the end. If you may have more assets, you may have different assets than you did, but you've increased in value. And when you're talking about rebuilding a Dynasty team, it's all about what you do with your value. So I think trading often can, and exploring trade and sending your league mate message, bother them. It's the offseason is Dynasty season. So if your league mates are getting pissed because you're always, sending them trade offers, then, I'd ask them why they're even playing. It's Dynasty. Like, what?
Yeah.
I don't know what else you expect.
We play Dynasty so that we have something to do in the offseason.
Yeah, absolutely. And then something that you wrote here, sell young assets with a limited ceiling. So kind of go into that and what you mean by that.
Yeah, so this is a qualifying statement. This is, I want you guys to be selling your assets. You rebuild. Sell your young assets with limited ceilings if they have risen in ADP.
Cam Akers?
And yeah, Cam Akers is going to be a huge one. Limited ceiling. Not a great situation. Going into his fourth year, the final year on his rookie deal, has a major injury on his resume. You could easily see the Rams moving on from him, especially as looking like a rebuilding team here and potentially losing McVay. I think one of the most recent examples we've seen of this, where you rebuilds should have capitalized on this concept, was Dawson Knox last season in 2021.
Yep.
He ended the season as a tight end 1. Everyone was really excited about his potential and his ceiling, and we looked at that and we said, no. His ceiling is going to be way limited. We don't really like the target share or lack thereof that he's getting in Buffalo. There's too many mouths to feed there. We don't, with the way that they run a 6-back offense, Dawson Knox is kind of going to be the last resort option there in the passing game. And turns out we were right, and he's fallen 2.5 rounds in ADP. And there were some who invested in him as a throw-in in trades before he went off last season, and they saw that rise in ADP, and they capitalized on that, traded him off, and got players that have a higher ceiling.
Yeah.
So just be mindful of that. This can come down to personal preference. I mean, George Pickens, I think, is going to be the guy that we're probably going to call this year, where we think, maybe you should be looking into selling him because of where he's going at in startups right now. Again, that can be debatable. Tell us your thoughts in the comments, please.
Yeah.
We'd love to hear your thoughts, but that's what we'd recommend.
And another thing we've got here is don't be afraid of age if value is there. And then the note is a lot of times it's because of rebuilders just like you. And the issue stems from, again, we touched on this earlier in the video, rebuilders are scared of age. And again, there is a point where they're decreasing value, where decreasing assets, they are absolutely smart to get out of. But again, guys like Chris Godwin as a good example, guys in that 24 to 25, like 26 wide receiver range, they're not necessarily decreasing in value or production yet. So don't be scared of those guys. In fact, you might get discounts on them from other rebuilding teams. If you are one of 2 or 3 rebuilding teams and these guys are trying to get rid of their, productive, proven players because they're old, and you find that they're still in a very productive window with a 2 or 3 year positive outlook in production, go get those guys to help you contend in 2 or 3 years. Again, your rebuild should not be more than 1 or 2 years, to be honest with you. Now, and I know one of the classic arguments will be, well, you get those guys on your team and they're going to lower your draft pick. Again, do not rebuild your team and focus your rebuild based on how many max points you score to get a higher draft picks, because people are ruining their teams doing that.
Yep.
I think a really good example of this is JCJ Dynasty, our guy Jeremy. He has multiple rebuilding teams in some of our DD leagues, and in most of them, his rebuilds have finished like 6 and 8. I mean, he has some rebuilds that have been on the podium, top 3 scoring for weeks. He's getting consistently around the 4th or 5th pick. But the thing is, while he drafted a rebuild and while he's getting a good pick, I mean, his team is not absolutely detrimental now because he had to go for Bijan, because he threw everything away to go for Bijan. Do not throw away assets because you're chasing a pick. That is how you ruin. It's how you lose in value. It's how you ruin a dynasty team. And then you're going to rage quit and you make it harder on the rest of your league mates.
Yeah, and especially in a class like this, I mean, the difference between the 104, 105 versus the 101, while the value is way different right now, I mean, you're ending with either Bijan at the 101 or Jackson Smith and Jigba at the 105.
Which honestly,
long term, I'm taking the wide receiver. I just
crazy,
am.
but the difference between Bijan and JSN is not what you would probably expect it to be, because JSN is a very talented, proven, elite wide receiver you're getting at a discount. And again, he's a rookie wide receiver. He is a very safe investment. The absolute worst case scenario is he does nothing his rookie year, and you can sell him at the same price if you want to, or more. Jameson Williams did nothing his rookie year, and he went up almost 3 rounds in ADP.
Yep.
Again, it's the difference between the 101, which is the generational prospect or whatever, and then some of these rookie wide receivers is not as bad. It's not a big a difference as you think. So be smart about that. I mean, don't ruin your team to get Bijan. We saw it so much this year, and we've got a video on it, and if you want to go watch it, you can. But obviously we had some haters for that. So, and the last thing I think we need to touch on, I'll let you kind of go here, is patience. You hold the cards for in your dynasty league as a rebuild. So you can kind of touch on that as we wrap up.
Yeah.
Here.
So if you're rebuilding a team, man, chances are you're trying to sell off, like we said earlier, those veteran assets, those decreasing assets, those older assets. One of my favorite times to be selling those guys is in the middle of the season. So if you're if you're looking at your team right now and you're a contender, but you have a lot of aging assets and you're trying to make a run here one more time in 2023, and then you're planning on kind of hanging it up and going for that rebuild, like, look towards the end of the season or right at the end of the season before we get too close to the NFL draft, because those draft picks are going to go up in value. Be patient. Wait until even the week of the trade deadline in fantasy seasons, because that's when your contenders are going to get desperate for that extra push, and they will overpay. We've seen examples of this in 2021, people selling Nick Chubb for 2 firsts as opposed to a 1st and a 2nd earlier in the season because they waited until week 14. You can get that extra value because you hold the cards. You just got to stay strong. You have to, we say this all the time, keep your head above the waves. Yep. and wait for that value to come to you because you hold the cards.
There are times in the middle of a season where it's not a bad idea to sell a young guy on a dynasty team or on a rebuild.
Right.
Because if you can sell him for picks, you know the picks are going to increase in value. Again, I think Jonathan Taylor is a good example of this. I sold Jonathan Taylor on a rebuild this year. I'm a Colts fan. I love Jonathan Taylor. I knew his value was lower than it probably should be. But at the same time, I was able to get back wide receivers. And for me, wide receivers are a much better investment for a rebuild than a running back. And even though Jonathan Taylor is younger than both of them, even though he's a dynasty cornerstone complete stud, sometimes it's a good excuse to do that. And if you're selling a guy like Jonathan Taylor, if you're selling a guy like even Breece Hall, if he were to come back and show out, and somebody wanted to give you
another buy,
and somebody wanted to give you a good amount of draft capital, take the picks. Not because you're going to draft a bunch of guys and have an all rookie team, but because you can sell Breece Hall for these picks, and then you can sell the picks for Breece Hall plus later. That's just how the market value is going to work. I mean, obviously there are exceptions to that rule, and obviously there are exceptions to all of this. This is not, a super, you have to do it this way, there's no other way type of video. This is just how we've done it. This is how we found that it works. We've had really good success rebuilding our dynasty teams and doing it in a very efficient and quick manner. And again, people, you guys are going to do this differently, and that's totally okay. So we are not saying this is the one-stop solution to rebuild your dynasty team. This is just something that, as we've done this with multiple teams over multiple years, we've found has been effective, and we figured we'd share that with you. So if you made it all the way through, you should hit like at this point, because honestly, if you're staying with us for 23 minutes talking about a rebuild, you must like the video. So hit like, make sure you subscribe to the channel. We're going to come out with all kinds of Dynasty content for you this offseason, particularly surrounding this 2023 rookie class. Part of getting an edge in Dynasty, getting an edge over your league mates, is being a good drafter in Dynasty, knowing the prospects. We're going to give you all the full breakdowns, analytics on these rookie prospects coming this spring. So as always, we appreciate you watching. Thanks for joining us.